I have struggled with a hip impingement for quite a long time. And in a sense, I stumbled into this work. I was just really stiff, and I discovered that I had a blockage there that was getting worse, and I figured I needed to do something about it. I just wanted to figure it out. And I actually, honestly, ended up working with people with hip impingement almost by mistake. So this video and this stuff that I'm presenting today, I don't even necessarily want to be presenting it. I'm actually a little afraid to be presenting it. But as you'll see later, it feels like my life's work in a sense, and it's something that needs to be shared. I'm gonna begin with a story because I know that everyone who has a hip impingement has a story. And this story happened somewhat recently, and it's been huge, and it's something that's given me a lot of strength to continue in the direction that I've been going. So I was on a retreat, somewhat of a meditation retreat, basically a circumstance that allowed me to just be really, really deep in myself. And this wasn't the most formal retreat. It wasn't something where I was meditating every day, all day long. This had a lot of direction, but also a lot of freedom for me to explore anything that I would like to explore. And I've been working on my hip impingement now since 2017 or 2018. I've made a lot of progress via stretching, strengthening, corrective exercise in this realm of body work. So I've already unlocked a lot of things, and I'm still continuing that exploration into my body. And so as I'm into this retreat, I'm about 2 weeks in, and there's a day where I'm feeling particularly in myself, in my body, and I choose to get on the ground and explore. And most of my work has been, very specific stretching work, very specific strengthening work, exercises, as you might say. But in this particular instance, I wasn't exploring any particular exercises. I was just exploring my body. I got on the ground, I started moving around. And as I'm exploring around on the ground, I open my hips and I'm exploring this place high in my adductor, in my groin, that is extremely stiff. And it's, in a sense, it's sort of begging for attention. And when I get in there, yeah, it's intense, but I'm familiar with stretching, familiar with all this stuff. So I choose to stay there. And as I stay there, I'm breathing, and I'm breathing deeply, and I'm releasing. So I'm using my breath to create a sense of softening in my body, and particularly in that place that I can feel is really fired up. And the position I'm in is somewhat of a frog position. So if you can imagine being on the floor, knees apart, and then I'm also bringing my hips to the floor. And as I'm going and I'm breathing and I'm releasing, this thing is starting to open up and let go. And I'm getting further and further into this position and into this spot in my body that is really sensitive. And of course, there's the feelings and sensations in my body and in my mind that's just like, get out. We don't want to be here, right? But I keep with the breath and I keep going, and I'm here for somewhere like 5 to 10 minutes. And what I'm noticing is as long as I keep breathing and releasing, it keeps opening. And I get to this spot where it feels like some sort of a barrier or even like a breaking point. Like it's a really important place to be. And when I get here, something very intuitive happens. It's something that I've done before in my body work. It's something I coach clients to do. But in this moment, it just happened naturally. It wasn't something I was thinking about. And what I started to do was to have a conversation with it. I could feel the fear. I could feel how afraid it was to let go. But I could also feel that that was the only thing in the way, was that it just wouldn't let go. So in this moment, my words to it were very gentle, and I started to say, hey, it's okay. It's okay. I know that there's some protection happening, that you're trying to keep me safe, but in this moment, it's okay to let go. And I just kept saying, it's okay. It's okay to let go. And as I'm doing this, it keeps letting go, and it keeps allowing me to open further and further and further. And here's the part that is absolutely astonishing. blew my mind in the moment, and still blows my mind to this day. This tension that I was feeling, this blockage that I was working with, suddenly evaporated from my body. It just left. And when it left, my hips just stayed open, and they opened further, and that was no longer there anymore. In a sense, it was like an exorcism. It was like something was there, and I worked with it, and I talked to it, and then it just left my body. And I'm very familiar with stretching. I've been stretching for a long time now. And usually when you stretch, you lengthen a muscle, right? You feel that length happening, but you feel like there's an endpoint and you're not pushing past that endpoint. And when you stop stretching, the muscle comes back to where it was before, right? In this situation, this is not what happened. This particular tension was gone, and it was gone forever. It's still gone. Pretty shocking. And I know it sounds crazy. It still sounds crazy to me, but this is something that I want to share because I think that this is huge, and it's something that I've been using along my journey, some of these techniques, and that really showed me like, hey, this stuff can work and is working. And I feel like if I keep pushing in this direction, I get more and more to let go, and more freedom in my hip. This video is a way for me to share my discoveries with hip impingement. I know it sounds weird, but I think about like, if I were to pass away, this work that I've been doing with this is something that I want to continue on, and I want other people to know about and explore to see what's there. I'm not intending to pick sides. I know that hip impingement is a pretty controversial issue. If you have this problem, I don't care what you choose to do. You should go with what you believe in. This video for me is a way to highlight a reality, something that's happening, something that's real for me and in clients that I work with. And perhaps it can give others the sovereignty to explore their bodies and see if they can figure something out too. So I'm gonna present my ideas and my thoughts on this topic and years of being in this field in an explorative way, in the hopes that maybe it'll help someone, and maybe it might push us all in a certain direction that we haven't gone yet. And to begin my thoughts on this, I want to say that if you're dealing with a hip impingement, you know, this is a problem that has occurred in your life. It's a place of pain, and you know, it's actually pretty common nowadays, a way of thinking that is like, the way to healing is in the pain. And so if we go in and we learn to work with this pain that we have and this restriction that we have, it could actually turn out to be maybe the most beautiful thing we do in our lives. It certainly has been for me. So if you look at people who are actually dealing with this issue, whether they've done surgery or not, to me, I find it extremely clear that we don't understand this phenomenon at all. There are hugely expensive surgeries that you can do that sometimes have a positive effect and sometimes don't. There are people in my world that will claim to have all of the answers of just do these stretches and these exercises, and those don't work that great either. So we are in a field of very little understanding and knowledge. So to me, after years of watching this phenomenon and being a part of it, I personally see this problem as much, much bigger than just bones. Looking at and dealing with just bones, to me, is like taking a sickly plant and just cutting off one leaf that looks the most sickly. But the whole plant is sick. It's not just that one leaf. And that idea is something that I don't think I can explain right now perfectly, but perhaps over the course of this video, it might start to make more sense. So what it seems to me that we're working with here is that the body has stiffened up into ice, right? Particularly around that hip for you if you have a hip impingement. And my personal thought around this is that that stiffening up is a protection mechanism. And that's the thing, when you have a hip impingement, it feels like this bone on bone thing, like you're trying to lift your leg or you're trying to squat and it feels like this action, and that's why it feels like the bone is the problem. But if you actually feel around your hips, and not just on the outside, but like if you poke in and feel deeply, you're gonna feel a lot of tension. These muscles are hard like a rock, and they shouldn't be that way, especially if you're in a relaxed state, which you should be right now. If you're in a relaxed state, then everything should be soft. So one thing I think about is, what if all of this stiffness just let go? What would it feel like? What would the range of motion of my hip be? But the muscles around the hip, if you have hip impingement, don't let go, ever. They've probably been bound up for decades. The most common story I hear when I talk to people who have hip impingement is that, yes, it's kind of like one day they realize it's a problem, but one thing after peeling apart in the conversation is that they understand that this has been happening for years. They've never stretched, and they've always felt a little bit stiff there. So this all comes from years and years of holding tension. Now, here comes the part that will likely challenge you the most, and it challenged me the most as I got deeper and deeper into all of this work. Think about the reasons that we create tension. Anything that you could imagine to answer will always come back to one emotion: fear. I'm late to work, so I create tension, raising my shoulders, driving my car. I'm afraid to let someone down. It's dark in the woods and I'm walking home. My nervous system is fired up. I'm afraid that something might pop out and get me. My partner and I are arguing. I'm getting upset, I'm feeling anger. Everything is rising. I'm afraid of losing someone or hurting someone. Literally, you could pause this video right now and reflect and think about anything that creates tension, anything that creates this fight or flight response. It comes from fear. So if you really sit with this, it's not so crazy to draw the link and the connection from something happening mentally and emotionally to that then appearing in your body. I can tell you right now, when I experience higher levels of stress, I'm always squeezing my legs together. Guess what that's doing? It's creating tension in my groin, which is most of the problem of a hip impingement. So perhaps I can weave back in this point of the sickly plant. Yeah, the problem is here, and sure, we could shave the bones down, figure something out physically like that, but the reason the problem exists in the first place is because of all this tension that we hold. And the tension comes from something much greater. So just like the plant, should we cut off a leaf, or should we figure out how to work with this whole thing that's happening to create a healthier situation for ourselves? And if I then weave back in my story from the beginning, guess what I was doing there? I was working with fear. Yes, I was a very physical thing. I was deep in a stretch, deep in a position that was tense. My body didn't want to let go. But ultimately, the letting go didn't come from me pushing further into a stretch. It came from the opposite. It came from me talking to myself, talking to it, and telling it it's okay, right? It's like going into the fear and sitting with it and saying, I see you, and it's okay. It's okay to let go. This situation is okay. So the interesting thing is, you can see that this centralized hip problem is something that you're trying to heal from, and this healing is actually much greater than just this hip problem. The hip is simply where the pain point has localized. So I could almost promise that if you start working with this problem, yes, at the hip and on a global level of your health, then you're gonna have a lot more progress. To me, discovering this problem of tension has been the biggest thing by far. It has given me so much release all over my body. And as more tension releases all over my body, guess what becomes a lot more effective? Stretching my hip. I get things that happen like my story from the beginning. And the more of this work with tension, this work with fear and emotion improves, the more range of motion my hip has, right? The better it all feels. In the recent year, I've switched my focus with my clients to working more on this type of stuff, and nobody's healed, right? Right? I'm not healed, but the progress that I've seen has been way better. It's been huge. And once people grasp this feeling of letting go, it's like a skill that you learn that you can then implement better and better every time you do it. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not a therapist. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm just a guy who spent a lot of time exploring this. And in my explorations, I don't think that you need to be like, oh, well, then I need to go to therapy and figure all this shit out. Maybe, I'm sure it'll be helpful. You should. But I think the cool thing about what I've been discovering in this work is you can keep it very physical. And that if you actually keep it physical and you explore all these layers, the therapy work will actually come about on its own. I've watched my clients come to these realizations of like, oh, like me letting go of all this stuff is bringing up a lot. I'm realizing that I've been holding on to all this stuff my whole life, and it's stuff from childhood, it's stuff from past relationships, it's all this stuff that's stored in the body. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a stretch and I've started to cry. You can work with this in the physical and work on releasing all this stuff, and just like my story from the beginning, there's stuff that can leave your body just from doing this work. And I'll share that, you know, a lot of these ideas don't come from me. They're just things that I learned from other people that I implemented really hard and saw some results from. And some of those people are Laughlin. You can look him up on YouTube. I'll put his information in the links below. I read a book by Dr. Gabor Mate. It's called When the Body Says No. And that was huge. I imagine anybody watching this video who reads that book will relate to it a lot. And it also might bring up a lot because you won't want to relate to it. But he draws the link between these physical problems and the whole health problems of your mental and emotional space. And lastly, I've been working now with Qigong and Tai Chi, because the sole purpose of these practices most of the time is to release tension. So these people figured out long ago that we hold a lot in our bodies, and if we release them, then we are much more clear in every way. And I want to wrap this whole thing up by talking about this process of discovery. I read this book long ago by, I think his name is Peter Woolben. It's called The Hidden Life of Trees. And he basically talks about how he discovered that trees were communicating with each other. They're warning each other of attacks and communicating through fungal networks. This is something that nowadays we accept as something that's real, right? But this man discovered this just with a thought, right? He's just walking in the woods every day, spending a lot of time in the woods experientially. And, you know, eventually they did the science and they figured out that this is something that's happening. And so to just bring that all back to this, like, what you're experiencing is something no one understands. And that sucks. I wish we did. I wish we had perfect answers. But also, this is an opportunity for us with this problem to explore. And I would encourage, like, try some of the stuff I talked about here. See how it goes. Let me know how it goes. This is a hard thing to share. I had thoughts of sharing this for years, and I could never bring myself to make this video. But you know, there's a greater force out there that is not letting me walk away from this. So here it is, right? Here's my presentation. Here's a lot of vulnerability that I shared. And seriously, like, leave a comment, let me know what's going on, how things are feeling for you. I don't care if you believe anything I say. I don't care if you think I'm crazy. I really don't. Like, this is just something that's been going on, something I work with people on, and something that I felt at this point should be in the world. So best of luck on your journeys, on your particular case with this, and just really hoping for some healing, some more healing in this world, more healing for people like us, and for everyone. Much love.